Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you had a good lunch. We are ready to proceed with the evidence in the case. State ready with its next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Jesse Worley. Jesse Worley. Yes. And then we can put it back. Makes sense.
Swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Go ahead and see.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please go ahead and introduce yourself to the jurors? Tell them your name and spell it for the court reporter.
My name is Jesse Worley. It's Jesseworley.
Okay. And Ms. Worley, how are you currently employed?
I work in the Division of Forensic Sciences for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It's also referred to as the Crime Lab. I work in the Impressions Evidence section as a latent print examiner.
Okay. And what are your job duties currently?
Primarily, my job as a latent print examiner is to analyze items of evidence that are submitted for latent print services for comparison, database searching, or chemical processing in our laboratory. I conduct database searches, I do comparisons of latent prints to known exemplars or known prints, and then issue reports of my results, and then testify in court when needed.
And how long have you been working in that capacity in your field?
I've been with the GBI for 14 years.
Okay. And please go ahead and tell us your education and training.
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic and Investigative Sciences from West Virginia University. I graduated from there in 2007. I was employed by the GBI that fall in November, and I completed a training program that lasted about 2 years prior to being able to write my own reports. The training covered every aspect of casework that we do as latent print examiners and included courtroom testimony and evidence analysis and processing. I can complete 16 hours of annual outside education or continuing education every year as well since the completion of my training program.
Okay. And are you a member of any professional organizations in your field?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell us which ones?
Primarily, I am an active member of the International Association for Identification, which is a professional organization across the globe that is geared towards education and publications for forensic practitioners in identification sciences like latent prints, also question documents, DNA, and crime scene investigation. I'm also a member of the Georgia State Division of the IAI, and I also hold an office with that group as well.
Have you testified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. What have you testified as an expert in?
Specifically in latent prints.
Okay. And has that been in Georgia?
Yes, ma'am.
About how many times?
It's getting close to 60. I think the last time I counted, it was like 57, 58 times.
Okay. Your Honor, at this point, we would tender Ms. Worley as an expert in latent print examination.
No objection.
No objection.
No objection. She's admitted.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Worley, I want to go through some terms with you, and if you can just describe or explain those for me, okay?
Sure.
Okay. Are you familiar with the term friction ridge detail?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what that is?
So friction ridge detail, as we refer to it in latent print examination, is actually the composition and features that are on the skin that make up the palms of the hands and also the soles of the feet. It's that detail and those characteristics that are replicated when your hand or finger or foot makes contact with a surface, and then that detail, that arrangement of those features is transferred onto the surface and leaves a latent print that we can subsequently develop and then hopefully compare in hopes of identifying it to a source.
So when I look at my finger, are you talking about the lines and grooves?
Yes. So
on my fingertips?
The skin on the palmar surface of the hands is referred to as friction ridge skin. It's made up of series of ridges and raised areas as opposed to like the rest of the skin on the body, which is fairly smooth. Within that ridge flow, there are different features where ridges either start and stop or they split into two. And it's those specific features and the arrangement of those features within the friction ridge skin that make up the detail that we use for comparison.
Now, what is an inked print, also known as a known print? What's that?
So inked prints, traditionally were taken using printer's ink on a white cardstock to record the detail of the fingerprints, so that they can be used for comparison. In today, with all the advancements in technology, most known prints are now recorded digitally with a glass, like a glass plate, and almost a scanner or camera type setup underneath. But the idea is the same. The detail of the skin is recorded clearly so that it can be used for comparison.
And can you please tell the jury what is a latent print?
So latent prints are what we are looking for primarily, like in evidence in a case, to determine who may have handled an item or come in contact with a particular surface. Latent prints are typically referred to as latent in that they're not necessarily visible right away when an object is discovered as a piece of evidence. The latent print may require a development technique like fingerprint powder or other chemical methods to make it visible. And then even at that point, as an examiner, we commonly refer to them as still being latent prints until we've identified them to a known source.
Okay. Now, what does it mean when an item is positive for latent prints?
At the GBI Crime Lab, the policy that we employ for determining whether an item is positive or negative for latent prints, we conduct a visual examination of the item, whether it's a lift card that has a powdered impression that was collected from the crime scene, or if we're getting in an item itself and we do the processing in-house, we're looking to see if after development there is any visible friction ridge detail that could be used for comparison. So sometimes if an item is we decide that it's negative, it might mean that there is no ridge detail on it at all, or it could be that there is some ridge detail, but it's so limited or so sparse or even like obliterated or distorted where it's not going to be usable because it's not clear enough for a comparison. That could also still produce a negative result. But at the point where we say we have enough detail present on the item to use it for a comparison, then we say it's positive.
And what does it mean when you say an item is suitable for comparison?
So once we have a positive result, that we've done a visual examination and there is usable friction ridge detail on this item or this lift card, the first step of our process is to analyze the amount of detail that's there, the type of detail, the clarity of it, and determine if it is in fact suitable for comparison. So we do the visual examination, it's either positive or negative. If we have the positive results, then we determine if it's suitable or not suitable for comparison, which is really just we're going kind of up a ladder in terms of how much quality and quantity of detail is present in the impression. So we have positive, and then if we say the analysis results are suitable, we have enough detail or sufficient detail to be able to compare it to a known set of prints.
And can you just let the jurors know what is the process that you use at the GBI for comparing latent prints to known prints?
So the first step, like as I've said, is the visual examination to determine if we have any latent print detail present. The next part of the methodology we refer to is the ACE-V method. It's an acronym for analysis, comparison, evaluation, and verification. So the analysis is the first part that I've described in determining from our positive results which of those impressions may be suitable for a comparison. Once an impression is determined to be suitable, then we'll move on to comparison, and that's taking the latent print and putting it side by side with a set of known prints and looking for similarity or differences between the latent print and any of the known prints that are on the records that we have for comparison. During the comparison, we're looking for similarity or differences. It just depends. Not every comparison will result in a match or an identification, so you may see more differences than you see similarities. But as we start to make the decision in our mind in what the result of that comparison is, that prompts the beginning of our evaluation phase, which is really the decision-making part of the process. In the ACE-V methodology, the way we use it at GBI, we can make an identification, which means that we've determined that the latent print and the set of known records we're comparing it to came from the same person. We can have an exclusion, which would mean that the latent print and the known prints were made by different sources or different persons. Inconclusive would be that there's just not enough detail to say definitively it either is or isn't this person. Or it can also be that we need a better set of records. Maybe the one set we were given may not have been clear enough in a specific area, so we may say that we need new records for comparison. And then lastly, we also use a conclusion that's called was not identified, or no identification was made, which is, it's kind of like it's not an identification, and we're confident that the latent print is not from a specific source, but we haven't compared it enough to say that it's definitely an exclusion. Exclusion decisions tend to, in some instances, be harder to make. When you're doing a comparison as an examiner and you start to feel like you're making an identification because you're seeing and observing features in the same arrangement and you're seeing the similarity, it becomes very easy to say when you've reached an identification because you have like proof positive, this feature is this feature, this one is this one, and everything lines up and you can see it. When you have an exclusion, sometimes depending on the area, if you're looking for like within a large area of the palm, there's a lot of area to search and you have to exhaust all the available features in the relevant area of the skin before you can confidently say that you have an exclusion. So sometimes exclusion decisions are harder to reach than an identification. And so what we have adopted in our policy is that I know it's not an identification, but I haven't fully excluded this particular person yet. And that we report as, excuse me, we report that as an identification has not been made.
Now, I want to turn your attention to DOFS case number 2020-6001183, okay? Who are the subjects involved under that case number?
According to the report that I have, the subjects that were listed on the evidence submission forms were listed as Gregory Johns McMichael, Travis James McMichael, and William Bryan.
Okay, and who's listed there as the victim?
The victim is listed from the evidence submission forms as Ahmaud Arbery.
Okay, so I want to turn your attention to the work that you did in this case.
Yes.
Okay, what items did you use to do your comparison in this case?
The latent prints that I was asked to examine were on evidence that was labeled as item 21 in the GBI Crime Lab information system. I itemized them to be 21A, 21B, 21C, and 21D. So those were all latent lift cards that were submitted.
Okay.
And then I was given known finger and palm print cards bearing the name Amy Eileen Elrod and William Roderick Bryan Jr.
Okay, and did you also use known prints of Ahmaud Arbery?
Yes, they appear as item 24.
Okay, all right. If I can just have Mr. Camarillo help me out with this here. Thank you.
Permission to go? Yeah, that's fine. Y'all can move around if you need to move around.
And Ms. Worley, are you able to see what's there, what's pictured? If you need to step down, you can, for the court reporter, okay?
Okay.
Okay, are you able to see this?
If you need to
Yes,
be
I
careful.
think so. Okay.
Okay, please be careful, please. Okay, so do you see what I have here, AE known prints? If you need to, you can.
Yes.
Okay, so Amy Elrod known prints, you said you received those, right?
Yes, those are marked as item 20A on
Okay.
my report.
And did you also utilize William Bryan's known prints?
Yes.
And also Ahmaud Arbery's known prints?
Yes.
Okay, and submitted latent lists, we talked about those, right?
Yes.
And did you say they were labeled 21A, 21B, 21C, and 21D?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if we can just start, I guess, in reverse chronological order, with D, 21D. What did you determine about 21D? If I could just get the cap off of my marker.
for 21D, after I did the initial visual examination for latent prints on that item, I determined that that item was negative. There was not any friction ridge detail that could be used for comparison.
Okay, so 21D negative for latent prints, right?
Yes.
Okay, going to 21C, what did you determine?
So the results of the visual examination for 21C was positive. There was friction ridge detail present, but upon analysis, I determined it to be unsuitable for comparison.
Okay, so positive for latent prints, but still
Unsuitable.
unsuitable
Yes, ma'am.
for comparison. Okay, so that leaves us with 21A and 21B. Looking at those lifts for 21A and 21B, what, if anything, did you see in those?
So on both item 21A and 21B, my visual examination result is that these items were positive for latent prints.
Okay.
I also noted that they appeared to be duplicate lifts of the same latent print.
Okay, so we have essentially A and B are the same print.
Yes.
Okay,
And that's something that, from experience in the way latent prints work, you can't ever create the same impression twice. They're always going to have different shape, different amount of distortion and movement because of the pliability and the way the hand is built anatomically, that you can't ever create the same thing twice. So when we see lift cards that are the same in most aspects, it's likely that they are duplicate lifts where the impression is powdered and then a piece of tape is used to lift it, and then a piece of tape is used to lift it a second time. And then both lifts were submitted.
okay. So before we go further on A and B, I just want to double back to D. So were you able to compare anything to D?
No, it was negative.
Okay. Were you able to compare anything to C?
No, because it was determined to be not suitable or
Okay.
unsuitable.
Okay, so no comparisons here.
No, correct.
Okay, so back to A and B, positive for latent prints, but the same.
Yes.
Did you use one over the other for comparison purposes?
Yes.
Which one did you use?
I used 21A because it appeared to be the first lift. The development was a little darker on the card. It was a little clearer than what was visible in B.
Now, go ahead and just tell the jurors your findings for 21A and the process that you used, of course.
So I completed an analysis of the latent print that was on 21A. I determined that the print appeared to be from the right palm of an individual and that there was sufficient detail present to determine it to be suitable for comparison. At that point, I began the comparison process by comparing the latent print to the palm print cards for Amy Eileen Elrod and William Roderick Bryan Jr. And my conclusion for both of those comparisons is that no identification was made.
Okay. So for Amy Elrod and William Bryan, you said no identification?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. What did you do next, if anything?
At that point, I compared the latent print from 21A, which again is that palm print, to the palm print cards that bearing the name Ahmad Marquez Arbery, and was able to make an identification to that set of records.
Okay. So identified to Ahmad Arbery.
Yes.
Okay. So positive ID. Okay. And did you testify that that was the right palm print?
I did, yes.
So from his right hand?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to tell where on his right palm that print came from?
Yes.
Okay. So may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, can you step down, please, Ms. Worley? Okay. So I'm going to show you my hand and right hand. And if you can just show, and if you can come so we can just go this way.
Your Honor, please hold up a second.
Yeah, go ahead. You do have your back to the part.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll do this.
And if everybody could speak up because you're off mic.
Of course, Judge. Thank you. We will.
I'm just going to flip to the image that I had of the lift card.
Okay. And my hand is cold. I'm sorry.
Okay. So
Okay.
the shape of the impression that was made, or the shape that appears on the lift card, is indicative of being from the edge of the palm. So this area here, it's commonly referred to as a writer's palm, because when you're writing and your hand moves across the page, it's usually that portion of the palm that rests on the paper.
Okay.
And so it was very similar to the shape of the palm print that was on the lift card, 21A, and then subsequently as well, 21B.
Okay, so 1 second before you sit. So if I'm holding this marker in my hand, are we talking about like that side that's resting here?
Yes, and then sometimes it varies whether it's very, straight up and down, or if it's angled in a little bit more to get more of the center portion of the palm, but that's still typically referred to as the writer's palm when it's that outer edge of the palm.
Okay. All right, you can have a seat. Thank you so much.
We can move it. We can move it, yeah, we can move it. I think we're gonna move this.
This over.
Maybe we should just not touch anything.
So, Ms. Worley, what, if anything, in looking at the lift, what, if anything, did you observe as it relates to the presence or absence of moisture?
In this particular impression, there did appear to be some areas that looked like they might have been wet or had an additional amount of moisture than other areas within the same impression. In my training and my experience, one of the things that we are taught to look for as an examiner is what kind of differences may still be present even when an identification is made. As I testified already, you can never create the same impression twice. So even when we have an identification, the latent print is never going to look exactly like the known print. I know sometimes on TV they show them up on screens and they overlay them and ta-da, they match perfectly. But that's not really how latent print comparison works. There's always going to be inherent movement and distortion within any impression that sometimes may be recorded in known prints. Sometimes known prints are well recorded and they're free from as much distortion as possible. But one of the things that we have to evaluate in making an identification decision is, are we seeing differences that are due to moisture or surface or development issues? Or are we seeing differences that are inherent to them being from different sources? And we have to use tolerance where appropriate in making that decision. In this instance, there were areas of the impression that do appear to be wet. The ridges do have a different appearance, and the powder does adhere or react differently to more wet areas of the impression. And so that was one of the observations that I did make in this case. But it wasn't so significant that it overreached the tolerance that I can use in making an identification decision.
Okay, so it didn't affect your evaluation in terms of the identification to Mr. Arger?
No, but it does make a difference in explaining why, if it were to be put up for anyone to see, the latent print does not look exactly like the known prints. And one of the reasons for that is there is moisture present.
Okay, and in doing your comparison, did you follow valid scientific procedure and methods
Yes.
accepted in your field?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and are those methods reliable?
Yes. I believe actually in going through the ACV method, I left off the V portion. The last part of ACV is the verification. Our policy at GBI requires that if all of our decisions are verified by a second examiner, with the exception of the no identification decision and some of our inconclusives, but my suitability decisions for A, B, and C, those were all verified by a second examiner, and then my identification decision for item 21A was also verified by a second examiner.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. At this time, that is all I have for you, Ms. Worley. The defense may have some questions for you, okay?
I may, Your Honor, just briefly. Ms. Worley.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jason Sheffield. We haven't talked about this case, have we?
No.
Okay. Were you given any photographs to come along with items 21A, B, C, and D?
No.
Or is it true that you're not sure where that latent palm print came from on the item, other than it came from a truck, but you're not sure where on the truck it came from?
That's correct.
Okay. The truck it came from?
That's correct.
Okay.
We describe our evidence based on what's labeled on the lift card specifically.
Right.
In this case, they were simply labeled as being from William Bryan's truck.
Got it. And then 21C, which had some detail on it, was that a fingerprint?
I believe it was, yes.
Okay. Do you know from which finger it came from?
No.
Okay. And then 21D, is that simply you don't know what in the world that was, or that it was a fingerprint with no detail that could be used for comparison purposes?
Based on the image that I have available and from what I recall in working this case,
Yeah.
there wasn't enough detail to say otherwise, and that's primarily why the result is also negative.
Right.
There's just very little detail present, if any.
So do you have the photograph of it, the card photograph?
I have a copy.
Yeah, could I take a look at it real quick?
It's not a great copy.
May I approach you? Yes. Just to take a quick look to see what you're seeing.
You
I may
want
have a question, I'm not sure that I will.
the lift cards, you said?
Yeah, the one that goes to C.
See?
Yes, please. Okay, so in looking at this, do you see any detail in it that makes you believe that it probably came from a finger?
The shape of the impression and the direction of the ridge flow is indicative of it being from a finger,
Okay.
but it's still not sufficient to compare it to any known source.
So you've got some detail that you think this probably came from a finger, but then you're looking for enough detail where you can say, now I can start counting up enough of the detail to try to match it to a known. Is that fair to
Right.
say?
Yes, so our determination for suitability is a combination of quantity and quality of detail. So while the number of features present is a part of the decision, it's not the total or whole component.
Okay, so D is probably a finger. We don't know which one.
D, I don't know. I
That's the
didn't
one
make
that
any
we're saying-
determination.
Okay, but it has some of the details that's consistent with a finger.
We were talking about 21C,
Oh, my
I
bad.
believe.
All right, so 21C is probably a finger.
It's very likely from a finger.
Okay, and then D is such that you can't even begin to determine whether it could have come from a finger or not?
Correct.
Okay, got it. And then you don't know where on the truck those things came from?
Correct.
Okay, very good, thank you.
No question, John.
Good question, John.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Fine. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
And you are excused, but subject to recall. Thank you. Is the state ready with its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the state's going to call Special Agent Lawrence Kelly.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Go ahead, have a seat.
All right, please state your name and spell it for our court reporter, please.
My name is Lawrence Kelly. That's LAWRENCE-KELLY.
And how are you currently employed?
I'm a special agent with the GBI, just the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
All right, and what is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
We're a state law enforcement agency. We're the investigative arm of the state government. We, when requested to do so, can assist local agencies with investigations, or we can initiate certain investigations on our own involving certain specific violations of Georgia law.
All right, so you're a special agent. What does that mean?
It means I am a Georgia Post Council certified law enforcement officer. I have powers of arrest throughout the state. I have specialized training in various forms of investigative practices, interviewing, interrogation, certain specialized training in examining cellular telephones and cellular telephone records and elder abuse investigations and general just investigations.
All right, so you got the normal training that the GBI provides all special agents, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but you have some special technical expertise.
I do.
All right, tell the jury about your special technical expertise.
I have two specialties. One is not really pertinent to this case. I'm a elder abuse or at-risk adult crime specialist. The other one, I am a technical specialist in the gathering and use of data from cellular telephones and social media records. I have specific training in to download and extract data from cellular telephones, to obtain records from various providers, and to analyze those records.
Right. So, would it be fair to say that sometimes you're the tech guy who gets called out by other fellow agents?
Yes, ma'am. Happens quite frequently.
All right. So, directing your attention specifically to May 6th of 2020, did you become involved in the homicide investigation for Mr. Ahmaud Arbery?
I did.
All right. How did that come to you?
I was called. I was not involved in the early stages. I was called by ASAC, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Richard Dial, who was my direct supervisor, and he told me to report the next morning to assist in some technical matters involving the Arbery investigation.
All right. So he was the one who was in charge of the investigation.
He was, yes, ma'am.
All right. So Richard Dial calls you up, and at this time, did you then submit some video files to another arm of your agency?
I did. When I arrived the following morning, I submitted 2 video files that I had received from ASAC Dial that were videos, 2 videos. One was about a little over probably a minute and almost a little shy of 2 minutes long. The other one was a truncated version of that video to Matthew Heath, who is a digital forensic investigator with our Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit in Decatur.
Okay, so